even if they continue the war?
It's contingent. That's a good question. I don't know.
Trump was absolutely right in his first term. He was right about Nord Stream 2, and he was right about asking for 2% of the GDP as defense spending. And I was a big critic of Merkel.
Yeah,
because right now I think he should just sanction Russia and see where they're going, because right now
I don't
just
think
push
you're
them
incorrect.
further.
I don't think you're incorrect. Russia thinks they're winning.
Growing closer to Russia while they're continuing the war would be a horrible sign. I think it would be a very bad incentive for everyone else watching, including Xi Jinping. I'm German, my wife is from the States, and 2 months ago we were visiting my in-laws in Washington State, and they pretty spontaneously encouraged me to go to this Charlie Kirk event at WSU because they knew I was really interested in politics. So I ended up going with my sister-in-law, and I had no clue what to expect. So 20 minutes into it, a staff member came up to us and asked us if we were interested in asking any questions. And I just asked about the procedure and thought, why not give it a try? So I actually ended up in the front of the line and got to ask my question about NATO and the Western Alliance more broadly, and wanted to assess what Charlie Kirk thought about Trump's foreign policy 2.0. A couple days later, people started sending me links from clips, and then the entire debate actually got published on Charlie's Facebook page first, and then part of it got published on YouTube. And it was really interesting for me to watch the comments. Most of the comments were really nice, appreciative, and thank you for that. But there were some quite confrontational ones, which were entertaining to read. They were ranging from, I was installed by the Ukrainians. Some people thought I was a crazy leftist mainstream guy who's just a warmonger. And then some people, I guess, like invested 15 seconds into a Google search and came to the conclusion that I just came from a rich, noble family, and that's why I feel entitled to talk about this. So it was pretty entertaining. But I just thought I would go through 4 clips and add a couple of things that I wish I had mentioned, and also talk about why I am confirmed in my belief that peace through strength would be a good idea and should be pursued by the Trump administration again. All right, let's jump right into the first clip.
Here's the way that we look at it as Americans. Through door A, we can continue this war. We will give more armaments to Ukraine, and 1 million more people are going to die. For what?
Not helpful, I agree, yes.
Yeah, and then door B is to try to find some settlement. Do you think we should try door B more than door A?
Absolutely,
Okay,
but
we
I think
agree.
he should put the same type of pressure on both sides.
So fair
because
enough.
right now I think he should just sanction Russia and see where they're going, because right now
I
we
don't
just
think
push
you're
them
incorrect.
further.
I don't think you're incorrect. Russia thinks they're winning, and they are.
Okay, just a couple thoughts about this. So first of all, he states it as a given fact, as if we just have to come to terms with Russia winning, which I strongly disagree with, because after 3 years of the self-proclaimed second strongest army in the world, just gaining small parts of Ukraine, it is not obvious that Russia is just winning. We've seen several times that Ukraine actually pushed back quite effectively. Of course, they are winning slowly right now, but I mean, we could do something about that by supplying more arms and putting sanctions up, because he says we have door A or door B. I think that if you view door A as the Biden way, that clearly didn't work well because they didn't have an end goal in mind. And door B's the Trump way. And he was very friendly, extremely willing to come to the table and talk about how to come to an end with this. But his 30-day ceasefire proposal was utterly ignored. And I think that it was a humiliation. And that's why I would propose that we do door C. And door C means peace through strength. That means that diplomacy is backed by real threats, because so far Putin just enjoys being back on the world stage by not really having to make any concessions. And that's just his way of prolonging the war. So far, we've just seen empty, meaningless words and threats from President Trump, which I think is not a good way to play with Putin, because we see that it hasn't worked so far, and it is a sign of American weakness. All right, let's jump right into the next clip.
Like, this is what Trump inherited. So that's how democracies work. So he can't do anything about what his predecessor did. Now he's in this place, and I think that if you just drop out and after saying in 24 hours I'll solve this war, and not getting it fixed, and just saying we'll stop being active there at all, I think that will have major ramifications for all the other
Let me ask you,
foreign policy.
Let me find where I think we disagree. Do you think we should grow closer to Russia or further away from them diplomatically?
Well, I think you can grow closer to them, but
we
I
agree.
think you should definitely not grow closer to them as long as they're still fighting civilians and as long as they still keep the war up. Because I think
The
you
bombing that Russia did is morally indefensible.
So first of all, I am glad that there's at least a common acknowledgement that nothing that Russia is doing is in any way justifiable by NATO expansionism or whatsoever. I think that there should not be a slightest hint, even of an idea, that Russia can get away with continuing the war and still getting better bilateral diplomatic relationships with the states as well as economic advantages. I think that would be a really bad incentive structure to set. And I also think that the rest of the world is watching this really closely, including Xi Jinping, which we'll come to in a little bit later. Most of the Republicans and Trump voters in America agreed upon that the horrible withdrawal from Afghanistan, the really crazy pictures that went around the world from Kabul, were a sign of American weakness and actually might have encouraged Putin to see if he can get away with this because he wasn't sure if the United States would intervene and do anything about it. There are a couple of points that I wish I had added. So, first of all, Putin always says his motive is to liberate the Russian-speaking minority. He didn't have to march toward Kiev and want a regime change for that. So I think that is always one of the things where people say that's a legit thing. No, it's not. He's obviously, that is not his end goal. He actually wants to push the Americans out of Europe. That's what resonates with the isolationist type, but the motives are entirely different, and that shouldn't be disregarded because it makes a big difference in the outcome and the consequences. Because Putin actually just doesn't like Western values. He really opposes the Americans fighting for freedom. All right, let's jump into the next clip.
Yes, absolutely. So I agree with you mostly. I just don't know. Would you also like to have a normalization of the relationships to Russia,
Yes,
even
big
if they continue the war?
It's contingent. That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay, because
Because
I
I-
think if you do that, and that's my main point about NATO, I understand that the states say we want to focus on the Indo-Pacific because that's way more important to you guys than Europe, which I understand.
And for Germany too. I have to
I
say,
agree.
I think China's a bigger threat to Germany than Russia. I really do. I know
I-
you might disagree, but
Well, I agree as far as like infrastructure goes. I don't agree as far as the conventional.
fine.
Yes.
Ground war.
But I agree with you. But I think that what Trump is doing right now is, first of all, pushing the Europeans more towards China. This is more like as far as the trade stuff goes.
That's an unintended consequence. You're probably right.
So I was really surprised that he didn't really think about this yet because it really matters in the way you conduct the talks with Russia if you even want to have a normalization, even though they continue the war or not. That's kind of how I also viewed the way that Witkoff conducted some of the talks. I think they were utterly unsuccessful, and they were kind of being deluded into a distorted view that Putin shows them of his country. It kind of reminded me of Tucker Carlson a couple years ago being there and praising the wonderful city of Moscow, how clean everything is, how well the infrastructure works, that the metro comes on time, and these chips and shopping carts that we have here for decades already. But like that is not a representative picture of the country. If you look at the more rural side of Russia, it kind of looks like a developing country. It's just kind of frustrating to see how successful the Kremlin is in their portrayal of the history, the way the Americans perceive Russia and this conflict, because I think it is a very distorted view. He's really downplaying Russia as the threat here because obviously I agree with him that globally China's the threat number one. But we shouldn't forget about the hybrid war that has been going on for 3 years against all of Europe with so many attacks on infrastructure targets. And that's their way of trying to destabilize the West. So let's jump into the last clip.
No, I'm just saying, for like 20 or 30 years, the Europeans have been a little asleep at the wheel.
Yes.
They've said, America will protect us. We can pay money for other stuff.
Yes, but now
that
like,
is changing.
But now we are leveling up.
Finally, but
we just passed a $1 billion debt deal.
I know,
to
but you and
increase
I
our-
both know Germany does not have a military-industrial base.
No, but this
you
is
guys
my
can-
thing. You should have Europe, as far as the economical power on your side, to be able to fight China. Because if you don't have the leverage of saying Europe is on our side in the Indo-Pacific, I think that'll have a major backlash.
That's
And
a
even
smart
though
point. I'm
we
not
don't
even,
have
I'm
tanks
not
or
even
any-
disagreeing with that. I want to give President Trump opportunity to end this war, and I'll just repeat this. You have to give him a little more credit, in my opinion, in your calculus of how hard it's been to even get Putin to talk.
Well, I don't really think it was that hard to get Putin to talk because one can argue if he even has been conducting real peace talks. He's sending really low-ranking delegations to Istanbul. Not even a Secretary of State is attending. I don't think it's that hard to get Putin to talk if he doesn't have to make any concessions. So far, he just wants surrender, and he's sticking to his maximal demands. But he has a really good point, because Trump was absolutely right in his first term. He was right about Nord Stream 2, and he was right about asking for 2% of the GDP as defense spending. And I was a big critic of Merkel because she did not meet the required goal of the NATO, but now Europe really is stepping up. They already have agreed upon the 5% that Trump asked for, 3.5% in defense spending and 1.5% in related infrastructure. So I think that a united West is really important, and economical aspects cannot be viewed isolated from military aspects and the NATO. Thank you, Charlie Kirk, for this debate. I really appreciated it. And I would love to know what you think, what side you kind of lean into. Let me know in the comments. I'd love to discuss with you. And thanks so much for watching.